Community Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an outstanding panel this evening. We have to my left Reverend Arthur J. Gass Sr., pastor, Mount Zion Baptist Church, Waukegan, Illinois. And to his left is Denise Rothhammer. She's the founder of Mothers on a Mission to Stop Violence. And anchor person is Morris Taylor, the magical motivator. He's an author and also a speaker. Greetings, folks.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this evening we're going to be discussing racism. And it's very important that we know what racism is in order to be able to understand it, in order to have a better society. And these are people that you should know is going to take us above the clouds. We say the higher you go, the less increment weather you have. And so the less increment we have about racism, that our guests will take us there. First of all, I'd like for Reverend Gass to tell us a little bit about his personal and professional background. Who is Reverend Gass?
Well, Dr. Brooks, from the state of Georgia, been here now for 31 years.
Okay.
Retired accountant through R.R. Donnelly, and still pastor Mount Zion Baptist Church there, where I've been for the past 30 years. And also president of the Black Chamber of Commerce, where we've been in operation now for a little over 11 years.
Okay. What piqued your interest to get involved in, say, like the Black Chamber of Commerce?
Based upon the subject that we're talking about tonight, when you look at the business economics within our county, many of those things was not relevant to our communities, and making economic development available for the people that we service, and that's why we have so much violence and crime within our communities, because there's a lack of economic development. And so my focus is to take that 26 years of experience that I had as an accountant and start an organization that would focus strictly upon economic development. And that's how I got started with the Black Chamber of Commerce.
To your left is Denise Rothhammer, and Denise, you're not a novice on Community Forum. You've been on the show talking about other topics, but this topic here is common for everyone. I guess not in the whole county. Lake County is approximately 750 to 800,000 people, but the whole country and the whole world. But first of all, before we get started with the topic of racism, tell our listening audience a little bit about your personal and professional background.
I work with assisting crime victims in the state of Illinois,
Okay.
who have become victimized by acts of violent crime, to kind of piggyback off of what Pastor Gass said. And I work to ensure that they're treated fairly and with respect for their dignity by enforcing their rights and working with them to empower them. I've passed 2 state laws, working on a third to try to remove the inequities that lead to most of the injustices and victimization that they endure, to prevent it from the future.
Okay, Morris Taylor is going to tell us a little bit about his personal and professional background, and we're anxious to hear it.
Well, Dr. Brooks, I'm a corporate skills trainer.
Okay.
I spend most of my workday in a classroom in front of frontline managers and leaders, helping them to acquire certain kinds of leadership and developmental skills. Among them is diversity training, how to work with a diverse workforce and get the best out of your people. And this topic is of great interest to me because I'm a member of the Baha'i faith. And as Baha'is, we have a conviction in the oneness of mankind. And so we are constantly looking for opportunities to make people aware of the scientific and spiritual reality of the oneness of mankind.
Okay. Well, let's define racism first before we get into it. Reverend Gass, what is racism?
Well, Dr. Brooks, you really can't put a Webster definition on racism. Racism is more of an ingrown, something that is taught to individuals from their youth up. It's not a genetic process in which something that you're born with. Racism is something that you learn as you develop and decide that this is something that you want to promote and to carry on because of what you have been taught. But there is no quote unquote Webster definition. If I had to just put something to define it, I can just say it's a personal desire that people have once they decide this is what I want to do, but that is nothing that forces people to be racist or they would genetically inherit, from my perspective.
Okay, Denise, what is your perspective then of racism?
The way I've viewed racism as an activist and working with a diverse population in many different issues affecting humanity, I would define racism as an insidious form of oppression that has the potential of escalating to the destruction and even genocide of a people.
Okay, Mr. Taylor, you mentioned Baha'i faith, but you taught that we are from the same dust. What do you mean we're from the same dust? Would you elaborate on that?
Oh my goodness, you caught me off guard with that one. Let me take a step back, and
Okay.
because the definitions or the perspectives that were offered by the first two speakers
Okay.
make perfect sense. If I was going to wrap a bow around it, I would say, racism is the belief, unsubstantiated scientifically, that every human race has certain characteristics or attributes, and those attributes determine their behaviors and their capacities, and that a particular race is superior to others. I think we see it in various forms. We tend to, we do use words interchangeably. We say racism when we mean prejudice. We say racism when we mean, cultural allegiance. But in general, I think that that's the definition that works in most situations. As we're coming from the same dust, in the Baha'i writings, we're taught that we all are created from dust, and to dust eventually we will return. And there's no distinction there. We're all the same. And the phenotypic traits that we have used historically to determine one race from the other, because of melanin in the skin or the shape of your nose or the tilt of your eyes or whatever. These are just traits that are attributed to, where your ancestors came in the world, how close they were to the equator, and how they had to learn to live, and so on and so forth. So these things certainly are very superficial in terms of determining one's race. And in fact, science has proven over and over again there is no reliable way to distinguish one race from another. It can't be done. So it's an illusion. It's a trick that we play to hold each other down.
Okay, well, who benefits from racism then? You mentioned hold each other down, but who benefits?
I think the bigger question, quite frankly, is who are the victims of racism?
Okay.
If I could just take a step back, in order for human beings to develop their potential, they have to interact with their environment. They have to have certain kinds of experiences. They have to have basic education. They have to have basic nutrition. They have to have a stable family life, shelter. And if these things are not there, their innate potential, it's impossible for it to come out. And so one of the examples that I often use, what are the chances of a child becoming a concert violinist in an environment where there is no orchestral music?
Okay.
He may have the potential to be the greatest violin virtuoso the world has ever seen. But if he's not exposed to that experience, it will never come out. And I'm often reminded of the Tuskegee Airmen, how they tried to prove that they were not capable of flying, and it turns out that they were extraordinarily talented at that. If they had not been exposed to that experience and that opportunity, we never would have known. So the question to me becomes, how many medical, scientists have we lost? How many doctors? How many great theologians? How many sociologists? How many diseases could we have cured simply because a certain population was not allowed to have certain kinds of educational stimuli, certain kinds of experiences? So the victim is not just the person who's held back, it's all of society. We are all deprived of what that person could have brought. And so one of the challenges is to create an environment where all people are respected, all people have these educational opportunities, have these environmental stimuli, so that their innate potential come out and they can contribute to the benefit of society and to the communities they live in.
So, Reverend Gaston, all Americans need to understand what racism is, right? If we want to combat it.
By all means, we need to not only understand it, but realize that if it's going to be somewhat abated, never can we destroy it, because as long as there's a devil, you're going to have racism. Right? But I think that we have to help people to understand that it has to be once change of heart. We always talk about the heart of the problem, but it's not the heart of the problem. I think the problem is the problem of the hearts. We have to understand hearts have to be changed. And as a Christian, that's what we believe, that we teach people to receive Christ as your Savior, and by doing so, the love of Jesus is placed into your heart, and you treat people as you would want to be treated, not to see them as inferior or someone that you can somewhat overshadow and profit from it and use them for your benefit. We are all God's children in the eyes of God, and we should look upon each other, because none of us by choice had a decision in where you was going to be born, how you was going to be born, who our mother and father was, etc. And only in this country, as I travel the world, is that we have this issue of color, because normally a person is known by their country of origin, but in America we have the black, the white, the brown, etc. But racism, when you look up on the pigmentation of one's skin, something that you have no earthly idea, had nothing to do with, and since this is the way God sent us into this earth, that we have to accept you for who you are. That's like me not liking Denise because she's a female. She had no choice being how God sent her in the world, but I have to receive her for who she is and respect her for that, and help her to understand that I want to help her to develop her potential. As Mr. Morris just said, all of us should be able to allow to do that, because when we are allowed to do that, then everybody benefits. One of the greatest weapons of evil, for me, that I see, is subjugation and isolation. Because when we are kept away from each other, apart, we never realize each other's potential, and we all suffer because of the lack thereof.
Well, Denise, let's pause here and talk about racism among females. It was up until 1920 that we had women's suffrage. Women could even vote, and I guess there's many reasons for that. I guess there's political reasons or whatever. But 1920. So, tell us about the effect of racism among females.
Well, again, it's like when you want to oppress somebody, you asked what does the person gain? Well, or who gains in this? It's really the oppressor, and there's many forms of oppression, and basically it's to self-empower and dominate. And so when it came to basically the women's movement, you had a peculiar situation where, on one hand, you had the abolishment of slavery. So all the blacks were freed, the Africans, or whoever they had as the slaves, but only the men, the black males, had rights. So the black women were still without rights to vote because they were now women. And so you've got to see that there's many different levels. And I was talking with an African American woman that I've come in contact with, and asked her, what are some of the grievances you've experienced on the issue of racism? And this is how we learn. I'm not going to know what life is going to be like as a black woman because I'm not a black woman. I can empathize because I have personally experienced oppression myself, and dominant figures, what have you. But from the perspective of a black woman, she told me that there's an issue where, and this is a middle-aged, I'm not a middle-aged, like mid-20s, educated young woman who's also an educator, and she says she does not have hope for marriage. She was explaining to me that based on her experience in her environment, a lot of the males are incarcerated and don't really have opportunities to get good jobs, and they're not really committed. And she said that also as a black woman, that she said black women are more likely to be killed by their mate than any other population. I hadn't looked up the stats on it, but this is what she's saying. So this is from her perspective, what she experiences. So there were all these grievances. And I really hope, and what I'm grateful for being, part of this discussion and raising awareness, is that people need to understand that when you talk about racism, it's not about putting up a defense. like especially for white people. White people should not, and not all white people, but some of the white people feel like you're automatically on defense because we're still being blamed for slavery and all the injustices that black people had to suffer with segregation. That's not it at all. What it is there are still grievances because there hasn't been a real remedy that has now made that population whole from having gone from that experience. So there's still a lot of inequities that need to be with public policy repeal, and we need to create policies that are more inclusive. So being able to communicate with other people on their grievances, especially those who are of color and experience this, and the reason why I say African Americans is because there's research that shows that the people who are most impacted by racism are people of color. So we need to really take an opportunity to learn, well, what is the impact? What is causing, these grievances so that this population cannot move forward and reach their potential, be included, be treated humanely, as our fellow man.
Yeah, I like to extend that a little bit. You emphasize black women, how they have been treated when I mentioned about 1920. What about white females? You notice in a corporate structure that we have a great deal of them forming together and filing suits and so forth because they have been discriminated at the corporate level. So you may speak of blacks, women at the slave level, but you have white women at the corporate level still. So it's a diverse effort.
Yeah, so that's sexism. So as I mentioned, there's different forms of oppression. You have racism, you have sexism, there's all kinds of isms. And so and so the main thing is what we have to realize is that these inequities that are creating these prejudice, this discrimination that keeps a certain group down, that's what we need to remedy. We've got to get to the source of the policies and start making those changes so that everybody can be treated equally. It's about treating all equally at all levels because we all have grievances, but specifically with racism, we have to really look and listen to people of color because those are the people who are most impacted on racism.
Reverend Gass is going to tell us about the power of unity and diversity.
Well, when it comes down to unity, picking back on what Denise said, one of the problems that many minorities have experienced is people just would not listen to our voices. For years, African Americans and other minorities have always said that we have gone through the issue with police brutality. Keep in mind now, we have wonderful police officers, and I love police officers, but in all, you got some bad seed. But historically, we have experienced the brutality, but before social media came, nobody believed that. Nobody believed that because from the judicial system, the police officer, his word was gospel because he was supposed to be honest, he was supposed to have an officer of integrity, and whatever he said, the court took it as valid, which is why you have so many incarcerated. And we thank God for DNA. We thank God for those agencies that help to free many who have been incarcerated wrongfully. And that unified voice of what we have always said, because of social media now, it is now coming to light that we see, okay, it's been going on all a while, but now we have evidence. We have, and thank God for cell phones and the photos that people are able, the videos that people are able to capture to see. But at the same time, that's causing us to realize that we have been saying this has been a problem. Now we see it's a problem, but even now, there still is a slow process to help resolve the issue because we don't want to accept it. It's almost like it's an insult to our country, our community, for someone to say, a bad police officer has, inflict this upon a community. But the reality of it is you have some bad in everything. So when we talk about the unity, we have to understand that we have to be able to discuss things in order for us to bring about the unity. And that diverse piece of that, no matter where we come from, just what in Minnesota the other day we had a white woman from Australia who was killed. So it's not an issue of one's ethnicity. It's just that you have that interactive bad police officer or that hyper police officer who, whether it was blatantly racism or an accident or whatever, who have taken a life, and now because of that, the whole community is hurting. But it's not just us as in minorities that's hurting, it's all ethnicities, because you have had people who have died at the arms of bad officers and what have you. So when you talk about unity and diversity, we have to have unity amongst people in general, and that has to come from a diverse background, which is like this panel here. We're talking about racism, and I think it's good that we are able to bring a diverse group of people to get a diverse perspective, because that's what helps to bring about the unity that we need so bad to deal with all our problems, not just racial problems.
Well, Morris Taylor is going to tell us about another perspective here. There was you mentioned about police officers. There was a chief judge, Roger B. Taney. I think about 1896, in Plessy versus Ferguson. No, maybe Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott decision. Chief Taney said that I guess blacks, have no rights. The white man to respect. That came from a chief judge. So you see what's that doing for the black race. Black men have no rights for white men to respect. Tell us about the insult to black, people or black culture.
I want to take a step back.
Okay.
You're going to hate me for this. But Reverend Gass brought up the story of the woman in Australia, and I think it speaks somewhat to the issue that you raised.
Arthur Gass.
Yeah, Reverend Gass, about the issue of the woman who was from Australia who was killed.
Okay.
And that's an interesting story to put a lens on. Because in this particular situation, this is a white woman who was killed by an officer who was not white.
Right.
Okay.
He was a man of color.
Okay.
And the response from the community has been very interesting to observe.
Yes.
For example, the Blue Lives Matter, the advocates for the police, normally they make a lot of noise in defense of the white officer who killed the young black man.
Okay.
In this situation, they're strangely quiet.
Yes.
They're not coming to the defense of this man.
Right.
Is it because he's not white? You notice that there, in the past, with these young black men, very often the next thing on the news would be, this person had a background. He had been arrested once before. He had a record. I would bet you there's nobody digging into her background to see what kind of history she has with the police. It's also interesting that in these other situations with these young black men, it took days, sometimes weeks, for them to release the name of the officer. This officer of color, his name was released within 24 hours.
Yes.
Okay.
All these differences. So it just highlights this whole issue that we have in our country around race and how we look at race and how we react to different kinds of situations that affect us as a community and how it affects our diversity and how we interact with each other. So you asked about this situation where blacks are treated less as a whole person. Well, this was in our Constitution, right?
Right.
Yes.
This is how it was. And so what can you say at this point? I look at our country. I'm originally from the South.
Okay.
And people play these games, no offense, Reverend, with the Bible. Scriptural gymnastics, biblical calisthenics. And they can take the Bible and they can manipulate the words to do whatever they want to make them mean, right?
Sure.
And so as a result, you have members of the Ku Klux Klan in the South who sit on the deacon board in their church.
Okay.
And they feel that they can substantiate their viewpoint using the
The
Bible.
Bible, right.
So it's part and parcel. It's part of our DNA. This country was built on slavery. It was built on subjugation. We had to have a workforce that was free, right? And so, it has a tremendous impact on the psyche of people of color. And it's a tremendous thing. And it reminds me, this thing with Australia, it reminds me of the civil rights movement when white civil rights workers were murdered. then it was a story. But there were blacks for decades being murdered. But as soon as a handful of whites were murdered, suddenly it was all over the news. It's all over the news. We see it also like with this opioid epidemic. It's a big story now. They've given it a fancy name, opioid epidemic. Blacks and Latinos have been, in the war on
years.
drugs for decades, since the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
But suddenly it's an epidemic and an issue because it's infiltrated the white community. So we see these reflections of the dichotomy that we have and this schizophrenia we have in this country about race, and it's a terrible thing, and it's rooted in things like that. We have a history of it, and we have to consciously work to overcome it.
And that same judge, a black and a white commit the same crime, and the white was not prosecuted, but the black was given a life sentence plus all of his descendants. Couldn't imagine that. Not only he, but all of his descendants.
Yeah.
It showed the inequality.
Sure.
That's way back way back when by a judge.
And that's the foundation of our country.
And again, because you're not born with it,
Okay.
it's something that is promulgated at the dinner table. When we're having conversations at the house, and it's something that is ingrained into people, and they inherit it, and they take it and they run with it. They teach it to their children, and here we are in 2017 talking about something that's as old as the world is. But it's not going to go away because, again, it's something that's propagated down through the years of people passing it on to their children.
But the impact, though, Denise, of the children, you mentioned children, when they are allowed to, they're segregated in schools, right? When they're allowed to come to school together and play together and go to dances together, whatever, and they find out that this is not what mom and daddy told me. Now, it's kind of the impact on them. That's a negative.
I can speak to the personal impact of a child. My daughter's Puerto Rican, and so she is not considered white.
Mm-hmm.
And going through the school system, there were a couple of individuals who bullied her and actually hit her. And so when I had discussions with the school on taking action, disciplinary action, I wasn't getting anywhere. I wasn't successful whatsoever. So I had to take the parents to court. I sued for the medical bill when I had them do a CAT scan because my daughter got hit in the head with a water bottle by a boy who just whipped it at her. And I wanted to make sure she didn't have any bleeding on the brain or things of that nature. And it's not easy to actually sue a parent about the misdeeds of a child because you have to show intent. And the way that I was able to show intent is the student, he actually made in his statement to the police that he threw the bottle at my daughter in anger. So that's how I was able to win on that suit. But the point is that when I was trying to get the school to keep the boy from attacking my daughter, they were not taking it seriously. And I said, well, is it because she's Puerto Rican? Why aren't you treating this seriously? And then I had the superintendent of the school come to a meeting that I had with the principal, and she wanted to tell me a story about how when she was in school, that this boy liked her and threw her down the stairs because that was supposed to be how you show normal behavior if you like a girl. You hit him or whatever. And I couldn't understand, okay, you guys are educators and I'm putting, you in charge of my daughter's care while she's here in your school, and this is what I'm getting. So I found that to be completely unacceptable. And I think children, so what happened on 8th grade graduation, he was awarded with the humanitarian award. Yeah. And so my daughter, she, after having experienced a rape at 11, being bullied, not getting the support from the school, things escalate. And so what I really try to work on and empower people with is to transcend these roles You know, you're going to be discriminated or oppressed by ignorant people, you know, at many different levels and stages of your life. But transcend those roles, know who you are. You know, in our family, we're Christians, so we put our trust and faith in God. Through Christ, all things are possible, so we don't rely on man. And so Jasmine's done extremely well. She's extraordinary. And basically, I think the lesson is we need to impress on our children that they matter and they have the potential, you know, that has been endowed to them by God,
That's right.
which nobody can take away from. And it doesn't matter what you look like, you're in the world, not of it. So if we can really teach them who they are, to know their own identity, their own strengths, they won't get or fall victim or prey to all these tactics of oppression that would lead to their destruction.
Denise, we're going to let you toot your horn a little bit. Your daughter could have went another path, you know. But what has happened to her? Did she
Well,
studied in England?
Yeah, so she, and what's really interesting is that my daughter went to Barrington High School,
Okay.
more than 90% white.
Okay.
So she's Puerto Rican and she had a learning disability. I received a letter from the school talking about how Hispanics and students with disabilities have lowered the overall grade or performance of the school. And here my child was both and graduated Barrington with a 4.3 GPA. She got an academic scholarship grant to Washington and Lee, where she graduated summa cum laude, which is the highest honors. Then she went on to, did a study abroad at Oxford University. And then after graduating, she went on to the University of Cambridge Law School, completed a 3-year program in 2, and now works at one of the top 5 law firms in England. So, you know, it's really all about, and this is a child, again, who had many adversities that she had to overcome. I'm a single parent, so she didn't have the father. I'm not wealthy by any means, but we just overcame odds because it's our faith and our belief and who we are as people. You know, I don't have the racist mind. I don't have the oppressive mind. I have an empowering mind. I have a mind of a humanitarian. So that's how I'm going to assimilate and associate with others. That's going to be my environment. And that's really why Jasmine does so well.
Now, we talked about what racism is, and I guess it has to be taught. You're not born with it, you know. But now, let's talk about the 2 types. I guess we all know there's an overt type of racism and there's a covert type, right? And I guess in this country, we cannot overlook the overt. Overt is one of the leading. Well, maybe covert is that. We can go to both of them. Let's discuss both of them, overt and covert. Some examples of covert. And I could give you some of my personal ones, but this is your forum.
Well, I think one that I would think, when you look at from an economic vantage point right now, I see economic racism, because we see that as something that people don't see as being valid. They don't say it's something that's overtly being done. But when you look at the disparity of people of color that at this juncture that don't have great jobs, they don't have good education, and this is not just a Waukegan issue. This entire country and every urban city is identical to the same problem. Low education, high unemployment, high crime, every urban city, and yet we don't see it as a problem. The drugs, as has been mentioned, has been a problem in our community for years. The drive-by shooting, the violence, it's never something that is amplified to the point to where we have to have action like right now, because we don't see it as something that's racist. And I see that as absolutely racist, because if you take the level of violence, Dr. Brooks, right now in Chicago, and all of a sudden transfer that to Barrington, I promise you, before we could get out of this
Would not
forum,
happen.
it would be resolved before in 24 hours.
Okay.
But because of where it is and who it is, it's not an issue. And I just have a problem, and I hate to say it, but it just, to me, it has such a racial overtone to it because it's people of color, and it's what the scriptures mention about Jesus when they say, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? They look at the inner cities as though, well, what's there is there, and what happened, it happens because of the economics or because of this the way it is. And no, it's not. And two things I hate when I hear people say statements. Number one, I did not think something like this could happen out here because it's not supposed to happen. And I think that's very demeaning. And two is when I look at people, I don't see color. I think those are two indications to say that you're deceiving yourself, because that's almost like me saying when I look at Denise, I don't see a female. How can I not? I mean, when I look at you, I have to see you for who you are. It's how do I respond to who you are that matters. And I think when you look at it from an overtly, covertly situation, those are things that I see, and from an economic vantage point, this really has a lot of racist overtone. And not to belabor the point, but right now, even in North Chicago, you have at the Marion Jones development, you have a $40+ million project that's going on right now. It just seems like to me that when you got a community that as depressed as North Chicago, there ought to be some concerted efforts to ensure that as many of those dollars as possible are left in that community for those people to have jobs. But it's just the opposite. You almost have to try to find ways to get people to get work. And that's, to me, I just have a problem understanding that.
Well, Morris, Taylor's going to tell us just how do we combat racism. Give us some strategies. You look like a strategic person now. Give us some strategies on how to combat it.
Well, I think the seeds have already been articulated by our friends here.
Okay.
They talked about how you're not born with it.
Okay.
And that racism itself is nurtured at the dinner table, in the living room. It's like your mother's milk. You're brought up with it.
That's right.
I think that's exactly how we're going to reverse it. We know it can't be legislated. And we've tried that. It doesn't work. We make these elaborate laws, and we try to enforce them.
Can't
we
work.
beat people over the head with them, like, we're going to use conversion by concussion. It doesn't work. It just gives people a headache. Right? And people, there's always a kickback. There's a lashback. And so I think that the way that we're really going to make a headway is to start to have these kinds of discussions with our young people as they grow up. And we have to expose them to a variety of experiences so that they can make up their own mind about racism and prejudice and cultural bias. They have to have their own self-validating experiences. The example I always think of, if someone is bitten by a dog, they may be afraid of all dogs, right? Well, that's not prejudice, right? If you're bitten by one dog and that dog bites you, that's not prejudice. That's being very smart, right? It becomes prejudice if the person holds on to that mistaken belief, even when presented with evidence that proves that most dogs don't bite. Then it becomes prejudice. So in the same way, it's possible that someone had a negative experience interacting with someone of a different ethnicity or different nationality or different gender. It's possible.
Right.
But how do you remove those blinders so that they don't attribute that characteristic or that situation or that scenario to all people of that background? So one of the things we have to do to start to combat racism, I think, is to expose our kids a variety of experiences, to a variety of people. Invite them into your home, invite them to your dinner table, socialize with them, join their churches, join their social activities. Give kids a wide variety of opportunities to interact with people that are different from them and have discussions about them. When we're watching television, going to movies, and we see these things, do we stop and talk with our kids? What happened here? What did you see? What do you think worked? What didn't work? What could be done differently to avoid this kind of a negative reaction that these people had? These are all little things that we can do on an ongoing basis, just try to change the perspective of our children. It's going to take generations to wipe it out, but it has to begin with the parents modeling those behaviors. The last thing I would say is that when you're in search of something, when you're earnestly in search of something, you look for it everywhere. We have to have that mentality where we look everywhere for opportunities to promote the idea of the oneness of mankind. We have to look for opportunities to model it for our children, to demonstrate it in our communities and for our neighbors and our co-workers. And they're out there if you're consciously thinking about it. There's no shortage of opportunities to combat racism in our society if it's something that's important to you.
You mentioned it took 300 years to get in the situation that we're in, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. Right? I have you here. I'm going to give you a test. Excuse me. Give you a test. And my audience is going to take this test right along with us. And it's about racism, what it is, what to do about it. Now, I have some racist statements here, and I want to see whether you classify them as racist statement or not. Number one.
Do I get a lifeline? Can I call somebody?
I didn't warn you ahead of time. Blacks and whites should learn to live and work together. Yes or no? Racist or no racist? Not racist.
That's not racist. We should learn to live together as people.
You said it's not racist.
You
Can we
said
go true or false?
True or false?
I go true.
Okay. Okay.
That's true.
Okay. It's a true statement, but
Well, I would answer that on the more on the side of racist. Because,
Why?
Because they're using race.
that's it. That's it. Black and white.
Now, if they
It's
would have
just a
said
racist
people should learn to live together, then it wouldn't have been racist. But
You
because
get 1 point, they get 0. All right. Who's keeping score here? Asian students seem to excel in mathematics.
And that's racist.
Yeah,
That's racist.
It's also a stereotype.
Okay. All right. All got a good. White basketball players do not jump as well as blacks.
That's racist and it's
That's
also a
racist.
No
stereotype.
doubt about it.
That's stupid.
Jews are very good at handling money.
3 for 3. Racist and stereotype.
Right.
We said the racist, right? Yeah, no doubt about it. Okay. Something needs to be done about drunks in the black community.
About drugs?
drunks.
Drugs.
Oh, drugs.
Drugs.
Drugs in the black community.
That's
That
racist.
sounds
Okay,
racist.
no doubt about it. Hispanic men try to be very masculine or macho.
Yep, that's racist.
That's
and
racist.
it's
Also
a
stereotype.
Yep.
This one is not a racist because Hispanic man is not race. Hispanic is not race.
Well,
It's
right.
different.
But
It-
there, it's
it's-
also targeting the Hispanic, I know, the ethnicity,
Mm-hmm.
but it can also be the race. You know, Hispanics are brown.
It's defining
They're
ethnicity.
non-white. Let's just say
Defining-
Hispanics are non-white,
Colloquially, people would assume that it's a racial term.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
because that's how we check mark the box: Hispanic, not white.
Right.
Almost all whites want equal rights for blacks.
Almost what?
All whites.
Almost all whites.
Almost all whites want equal rights for blacks. It's obviously,
Well, I mean that's racist against
Okay.
the whites. Yeah.
right, okay. Lewis and Clark were the first white men to explore much of America.
No.
Well,
Are we back to true and false?
Is that racist or not?
I wouldn't say that's racist. It's just pointing out
just-
their race.
Well, it's
Yeah.
racist because they use a white man.
Well, it's
but
just
you don't have
historically false.
you
but-
can be racist without using race,
Yeah.
just by using the person's name.
It's like saying President Obama was the first black
Yeah,
president.
right.
That wouldn't be racist.
Then that's racism.
No. If you say President Obama's the first black president, that's not racist.
Yeah, black. I don't know what I'm gonna give you guys the answer sheet then.
Okay, good.
The answer sheet says race.
Yeah.
Well, you better talk to the psychologist who did
Yeah,
that.
right.
Universities have tried to recruit more black students.
Okay, so then we'll go along with yes, it's racist.
Okay,
That's
all right,
pretty
now you
racist.
catch it on. You catch it on now.
It's like studying for
Most
the
Puerto
LSAT.
Ricans receive welfare.
Racist.
Oh my God.
Racist.
Well, race is not.
Oh, okay, so again,
Puerto
it's
Rican,
to the
not a
Hispanic,
not a
yeah,
race, you know.
right.
Okay.
Well, again, talk to the psychologist because he's using the Puerto Ricans. That's not referring to me as black. That's not referring to her as white. You are singling out an ethnicity of not an ethnicity, but a locale of people.
It's not race, though. Race. Okay, you have to challenge the.
I will because
Okay.
they look at Puerto Ricans as the brown. That's what Denise just
Yeah.
got to talking about.
Yeah,
You
so again,
know.
colloquially,
Non-white.
I would assume
Yes.
that
So
it's-
non-white,
Right.
yeah.
Okay, I just thought I would. We have a few minutes left, and I'm going to share something with you. Who was the first president of the United States of America?
Well, from what we know is George Washington.
George Washington, right? But I have some information I want to pass to you that George Washington was the 8th president of the United States. The first president of the United States was a black man named John Hanson. Take one, pass it on, please. John Hanson, for our listening audience, go to your computer, John Hanson, Hanson.
Yeah.
And the reason is that before we had the Constitution of the United States, 1787, we had Articles of Confederation.
Right.
And he was the first president of the Articles of Confederation. Okay? So we all, we talked about who benefits and what are some of the benefits, I guess, of racism. And I might lead you, and we talked about it too, economic discrimination, right? You talked about that too, right? Economic discrimination. Economic and political benefits, and also psychological. You mentioned it too, psychological benefits so what can we in the community do to get rid of racism? The community, the 800,000 people that watching the program. As a matter of fact, this program is gone worldwide.
Okay.
Because it's online, right? So what can the world do to get rid of racism?
Well, again, we will never get rid of it because it's an evil that is taught, but I think that we can help to alleviate a lot of it by teaching our children how to love and to care and to respect each other as to who they are, and not allow yourself to be in a position to oppress someone because of who they are, whether their race or gender. And I think to do unto others as you would have them to do unto you, as the scripture teaches us.
Okay, Denise?
Yeah, the self-check.
Community efforts now to.
Right, the self-check, and you really have to transcend race, gender, socioeconomic class, whether somebody's college educated or not, or if they have abilities or disabilities. We really have to transcend all those factors and just look at the human being, but first identify with yourself as a human being. Don't see yourself in a certain way, and then it won't be so harsh when it comes back at you. And definitely 2 wrongs don't make a right.
Our Inca man.
You know, one very specific thing, and it may sound petty, but say no to racial jokes.
Oh, okay.
You know, we hear it all the time, we laugh politely, but some of them are just wrong and they do a lot of harm. And I've heard people say to minorities, well, you're oversensitive. And I think that they forget that for that non-person of color who's making the comment or making the joke or laughing, for them it's just a one-time thing. For that person of color, they hear this day in and day out.
Stay
So
with it.
before you say you're being oversensitive, you have to take that into consideration. So say no to racial jokes. If you hear something you know is wrong, respectfully say to the person, you know, I don't like what you said. I wish you wouldn't say that. At a higher level, again, educate ourselves on the facts. There are scientific facts about the reality of man, about the oneness of mankind, about his spiritual reality as one. We need to understand those things. We need to understand the history of race, where we got those different categories from, how superficial they were, how they really don't stand up to reason, how the variability of the human species is what has allowed us to survive for decades and will allow us to survive in the future as our environment starts to change. These are all things that we need to understand, and rather than see race as a curse or a blight or something to use to subjugate other people, we should celebrate that diversity. We should recognize that, you know, you don't want all the flowers to be the same. If all the flowers in the garden were the exact same, how boring would that be? It's that variety, it's the difference in shape and color and fragrance. That's what gives the garden its real beauty. That's what gives the Garden of Humanity its beauty. We need to take that, we should use that, we should leverage that for the benefit of all.
Reverend Gass could talk about this too, a comment about the rainbow in the sky, for example. He mentioned about the flowers, but the rainbow is another example of how God wanted the world to be in different colors.
Well, the diversity of people, you know, that's who we are. That's who God made us. And God made us to be all of his children, and his children should learn that we are who God made us, and neither one of us are better or should try to oppress another. It's wrong to do that. It's evil to do that. And let's love individuals for who they are and recognize God loves us all.
Well, who is responsible? I guess that's a good question. Who's responsible for stopping racism? I think we mentioned one, and that's the community round table, dinner table, this type of thing. And I think we also mentioned about the government too, right? You could pass all the laws that you want to, but you got to go further than just the law, right?
Well, again, when you say who is responsible, you know, every child has a mother and a father.
Okay.
It is responsibility of that mother and father to bring that child up in the nurture and admonition of God, and to teach them the ways of God, God's word. And when we teach them that, the love of God in their hearts will help them to love humanity for who they are. And love overrules and will conquer hate any day. But again, it has to start at infancy and through childhood, through adulthood. The old saying goes, hard to teach an old dog new tricks when you can't teach one, but we have to catch children when they're young, teach them to love and to respect. And that starts with mothers and fathers at home. They are responsible for raising up their children, so that when they do leave home, they can learn that I have learned at home to respect a person for who they are, and because that's how I was raised at home.
Well, leaving home, what agency? I'm not playing a blaming game, you know, but we're opening the door. What agency is responsible for stopping discriminatory practices or racism?
The EEOC?
Okay, that's one, okay. Right, definitely so. What about the unions?
Well, that's another racist issue. I mean, when you look at unions, you know, they do not represent the diversity of our nation, because again, their birth right now today, even though when you talk about public policy, public money, you know, minorities have a percentage when it comes down to public dollars, but those percentages can't even be met because those percentages of people are not into unions. So unions have to have a lot to do in order to make sure that they bring minorities of all ethnicities into the union so that they can meet those, you know, federal compliance goals to help people have economic parity.
Denise mentioned EOC, but I was a EO officer at a certain agency before I retired, and we couldn't get, you know, the plumbers, electricians, the one that you have, because they couldn't get clear through the unions, right? So what we did, we used a in-house training and kind of training program where we would give them on-the-job training and send them to Collinsville County for the academic work. And we did work with the unions to give us, you know, assistance, you know, in doing that, and that worked out well. So that's a one way I think is through vision or whatever you want to call it, and to get. Then you find out at our agency that I worked at, we had just a great number of let's just say technicians, but the electricians and what they call the
Laborers?
yeah, well, laborers and so forth. But that way, we grew our own, what I'm trying to say. And I think that's what you're doing too. You're growing your own at the, at your,
We're doing, and one of the problems that we have is that when you have public money is just like you and Mrs. Brooke, you all have children. When you was raising your children, it was wrong for you to put all of your eggs in one of your children. You have children, so you are responsible for all of your children. Our country has to see all of her citizens that way. You have to be responsible for all of the citizens. And by being responsible, that means you have to make provisions for all citizens.
I want to thank
order
each
to have
one of
that.
you for taking time from your very busy schedules to be with us on Community Forum to discuss a topic that's world need to be discussing, and that's racism. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Reverend Arthur Gass Sr., pastor of Mount Zion Baptist Church, Waukegan, Illinois, Denise Rothhammer, founder, Mothers on a Mission to Stop Violence, and also our anchor person, Morris Taylor, the magical motivator, author, and speaker. We hope that you have been benefited from the discussion about racism and how to overcome it. And we want to thank our panels. These are people that you should know. This has been Community Forum. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks Sr., your host.